We are going to begin this interview the way we begin interviews with candidates for all kinds of races, with a couple of questions we feel compelled to ask every candidate. The first question is, have you ever declared bankruptcy, Mr. George?
No, sir.
Okay, and Judge Schreiber?
No.
Okay. Have you ever been arrested?
No.
Okay.
No, sir.
Okay, great. All right. We can get to...
So far, these are pretty easy.
yeah. One...
Well, we found something on our background check on you, Mr. George, regarding a school bus passing while stopped. Do you want to talk a little bit about that incident?
Holy smokes. 1999?
Yeah, I think it's about...
1998, 1999?
Yep.
What I recall about it was I was assigned to the intake division in the state attorney's office in the intake division. I was on my way to work. A school bus had pulled over, and the cars that were ahead of me went. I was about halfway past the bus when the stop sign came up, and I just got pulled over.
I see. Okay. Great. And what was the outcome of that?
Oh, I paid the fine, and that was it.
Okay.
So that was the ticket.
That was a ticket, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Let's start with a standard question, and that is why you're running for judge. And start with Mr. George.
I've been a lawyer for 23 years. I've been in the courtroom for 23 years, whether it be doing criminal defense, civil defense, dependency law, or criminal prosecution. I've been in the courtroom. I've done well over 100 trials. I love being in the courtroom. I'm 50 years old, and I've been in the courtroom for 23 years, so I've been in court more than for half of my life. I loved every minute of it. Whether I started out as a public defender in Volusia County, or actually in Putnam County, but then I moved to Daytona. It's where I belong. It's where I feel comfortable. It's where I feel I can do the most good. Whether it be representing clients when I first started my career, or helping hundreds, if not thousands, of victims through the court system now as a prosecutor. I see this as a logical extension of my career, and it's what I've always wanted to do.
And Judge Schreiber.
For the last 3 years, I've been serving the people of the county, the 9th Judicial Circuit, and I've enjoyed every moment of it. I made my decision to apply for a judgeship probably about 4 years ago at this point. I went through the appointment process, and I was appointed by the governor 3 years ago. I want to keep this position because I think serving as a judge is the highest form of public service that there is, and I have always been committed to serving the public. I think it's important to serve the public, not only your profession, but the community at large. Since we moved here in 1988, I've been a committed resident of Orange County and have been involved in many, many activities. I've been a lawyer for 29 years, a judge for 3. I've handled over 60 criminal jury trials at this point. I have broad civil experience, and I have some personal injury and some family law experience. So I think the breadth of my experience is good, and I think that my commitment to follow the law that's been enacted by the legislature is what draws me to the position. It's so important to be fair, to be impartial, to be professional, and that's what I love about this job.
Mr. George, can you talk about, you mentioned being a public defender and a prosecutor. Do you have any civil experience?
When I first started, I worked, and I rarely count this, when I first started, I took a job with a sole practitioner in Lakeland. It only lasted for about 45 days because I was not very happy with my employer at the time. Other than that, I worked in insurance defense from 2001 through 2002 with an insurance defense firm. Sat in on one trial.
And do you consider that a detriment at all if you were to be, or a challenge if you were to be elected and then assigned to civil cases?
No, not at all. I think there might be somewhat of a learning curve. I'm sure the judge could talk about learning curves when she went to the bench as a criminal judge. Certainly there's a learning curve involved in anything, but the fact that there's still rules of procedure. The courtroom runs basically the same and trials run basically the same, although the rules may be a bit different. The learning curve is nothing that scares me, and actually I look forward to doing it.
Could you tell us about your learning curve on criminal cases?
Well, there is a learning curve when you go into a brand new area of the law. The judicial system does a very good job of giving you all of the tools that you need to become very familiar with the substantive law. So that part wasn't difficult. And then a big part of being a judge is managing a docket, and a very busy docket and a very hectic docket. That is something that I believe my prior experience lends itself toward, and I have some prior business experience in managing a business, managing employees, making sure things run on time, and that's important in being a judge.
You mentioned your experience in managing a docket, and we're looking at this recent poll by Orange County lawyers, and one of the things they knock you on is that it says Judge Schreiber seems to take a long time to get through her docket. Can you reconcile that comment with what you just said?
Certainly, and it's difficult for me to respond specifically.
Sure.
Because the comments are anonymous, so I don't know what context that they are made in. But I do know that as a sitting criminal judge, you inherit a docket of a certain number of cases. There were times where I had 250 to 300 cases set for a pretrial conference. It doesn't matter how fast I am. If you do the math and everybody shows up at 9 o'clock for a pretrial conference, they're going to end up waiting. I don't know if it was in that context or some other context, but I do know that generally speaking, the hearings were always on time, and it was the trial calls, the docket soundings, that were occasionally a little hectic.
Mr. George, how did you choose this particular group and this particular judge to run against?
Well, I've thought about running for about 10 years or so. When the opportunity arose when Jeff Ashton took over as state attorney, he changed the policy to allow state attorneys to maintain their employment. One of the things that always held me back as being a government employee was having to basically quit my job for up to a year to actually mount a campaign. That was always very prohibitive to me. When Mr. Ashton came in and changed that policy, it allowed me to still fulfill my duties as an assistant state attorney, as well as a trial unit director, as well as actually try to mount a campaign. Why I chose this race, it wasn't anything conscious. It wasn't a decision to run against an incumbent or not against an incumbent. I was looking at the board and I was trying to figure out what gave me the best opportunity to win, and this was the race that I chose.
Have you been endorsed in the race by Mr. Ashton?
I have.
Has he endorsed many candidates?
I don't know, sir. I think he has endorsed one other of his employees, but I don't believe he has endorsed the other two, but I'm not positive on that.
Have you ever applied for any vacancies in the past?
I have. I believe it was 2 or 3 times that I've applied.
Were they for circuit judge vacancies or county judge vacancies?
I believe they were either all circuit or 2 of the 3 were.
And any theories as to why you didn't get picked?
Well, somebody mentioned at the League of Women Voters Luncheon last week that it's a very political process. In order to get through the committee, The nominating committee, you basically have to know the right people to get through, or at least that's the theory behind it. I had the same credentials that I have now, except for a couple more years of experience. I thought I was more than qualified then, as I feel I'm more than qualified now. I don't know, because I'm not privy to that information, nor was I privy to any of the conversations that the nominating committee had, so I don't know exactly what the reasons were. But I know that I didn't have a whole lot of people or influential people calling on my behalf.
Judge, did you find the process to be political?
Well, I've heard it was political, but I've never considered myself a political person. I tend to stay in the background and do my job. So if it was political, there was a political undercurrent that I'm really not familiar about or familiar with. And so I can't really speak to how political it is, except to say I didn't know the people to make the phone calls. I didn't know who was on the committee until I put my application in and looked up the JNC to find out the names of the individuals on the committee. I'm told that my name was vetted, and my experience and my qualifications were what led the committee to give my name to the governor, and what led the governor to pick me as a judge.
Had you been active in any political campaigns before?
No, I've never been active in a prior political campaign.
Mr. George, how do you convince the voters that you have the proper temperament to be a judge?
Well, I think my reputation speaks for itself. If you are doing your homework, and it sounds like you have, if you talk to any of the people over at the courthouse that I've worked with for anywhere from 1 to 15 years, especially the defense bar, they would probably tell you to a man and woman that I am a reasonable guy. I'm not interested in convictions as much as I am in justice. If they have a story to tell, if they have a defense, they can always come to me, and I'll always listen to it. They know that I fight fair. They know that I fight hard in court, and they also know that at the end of the trial, I'm going to shake their hand, and they're going to know they got a fair fight. And that's what I insist upon as well. The voters should know that I've never had a complaint lodged against me by anyone at any time, whether it be an attorney or a citizen, about the way that I've conducted myself, either in court or the decisions that I've made as a prosecutor. So I have to stand on the reputation that I think I've earned over the last 16 years here with the state attorney's office, as well as anywhere else that I've been.
And I guess to flip the question a little bit for you, Judge, how would you describe your temperament?
I would say my temperament is judicious at this point, and but seriously, my background is a background of service to the profession, and I don't think I would be where I am today if I didn't have the temperament to be a judge. And let me give you a couple of examples. I was very involved with the Orange County Bar Association and received the Outstanding Service Award. I've been a 25-year member of the Central Florida Association for Women Lawyers and was elected president of that organization. I've served as president of Community Coordinated Care for Children. I'm currently on the executive board for the Benji Watson Pediatric Cancer Foundation. I think that my activities show my temperament, because if my temperament was other than moderate, fair, reserved, I wouldn't have had those positions.
What do you think the most significant challenges facing the court system? We'll start here.
Volume, at least in the criminal court. And speaking with the civil people that I've spoken with, volume seems to be a very big deal. The courtrooms are packed on a daily basis. If you come to the courthouse on a Monday or Tuesday, trying to find a place to park after 9 o'clock can be a problem. It's the administration of justice that needs to move faster. It's easy to say we need more judges, and I would wholeheartedly agree that we do. We could use a couple more on both the civil and the criminal side. But it's how we administer that justice with the judges that we have is going to be the key as to whether or not we get a handle on it. Because right now, people are waiting 4 or 5 months for hearings in the civil field. They're waiting up to a year for a trial. The criminal courtrooms are, depending upon the division, are just jam-packed. And like Her Honor was saying before, sometimes you can have pretrial dockets with a couple hundred people, and it looks like an airport terminal over there. The key is to have judges that can make quick decisions and get cases moving. It means getting lawyers in and getting lawyers out of court as soon as possible. It means giving people their day in court when they need it. But at the same time, be cognizant of the fact that there's only so many hours in a day, and that you can't waste people's time. You can't waste the attorney's time. You can't waste the citizens' time who are coming away from work to come to the courthouse. Victims who deserve their day in court, and oftentimes they'll come and they'll sit for 3 or 4 hours just to find out that the court can't accommodate them that day, and they have to bring them back. It's frustrating. So until we can get more judges and more people involved to try to take some of the load away from the dockets that currently exist, there has to be a better administration of that time. It has to be more effective. I know how to run a docket. I can run a docket tomorrow. I've been in court for so long. I could run a docket tomorrow, and I know exactly how I would do it. I've seen some great judges in my time. I've seen some poor judges, and I think I know what would work, at least in the criminal field. For the civil field, I don't see much of a difference, other than they may have different priorities, but certainly getting attorneys in and out to do their business so they can leave, and getting the citizens in and out so they can go about their lives is key. And it all comes down to how effectively you can do that.
Judge, you want to take a crack at the same question about the challenges?
Well,
the biggest challenge?
Sure, I agree with much of what was just said. I do think we need more judges, and I do think, even more importantly, we need law clerks for every judge. I envy the federal judges that have 2 law clerks per judge, because we have about 1/4 of a law clerk per judge. So it's very difficult to manage a heavy docket and do the research after hours and make sure that you have time to write the opinions and keep everybody happy at the same time. But it's part of the job, and it's part of the job that I love and I thrive on. Quantity of cases is significant. When I inherited the civil docket as of the 1st of January, my docket had roughly 2,600 foreclosure cases. That's not counting roughly 5,000 other cases. You have to manage your docket. You have to have accountability. You have to make sure that every case has a follow-up date. So I agree that management is very, very important. I also think that we could do a better job of educating the public of what we do. I think sometimes the public doesn't understand, and I think it would be great if they had a better picture of a day in the life of a judge.
How would you do that? The education you just mentioned.
Well, the education you just mentioned, perhaps getting field trips from the junior high social studies classes to come to a tour of the court. Perhaps do a brief video for distribution in the Orange County school system. There's a lot of ways to try and do that, to just make it more apparent as to what a judge does.
Might not be bad for jurors who are waiting around, potential jurors.
There's an excellent video that's presented to the potential jurors about the process. I don't believe it talks about the administrative situation.
Sure.
I wanted to follow up on something that you said, Mr. George. You talked about seeing some great judges. Who stands out in your experience as a particularly effective judge over your career?
The first name that came to mind was Judge Conrad, who passed away a couple of years ago. Certainly Judge Lawton, Judge Whitehead, certainly Belvin Perry. What's interesting about, I know Judge Perry was a prosecutor, and I believe he ran against an incumbent. Judge Lawton was a prosecutor. Judge Dorothy Russell, she was my first felony judge when I came to Orlando. I thought she was very effective. She was an ex-prosecutor. They all seemed to understand what the goal was and what we were all doing there. They didn't suffer fools very well. They needed you and demanded that you be prepared. And That taught me to be a better lawyer. I thought they were very judicious, and even after hearing a case, they could see the forest through the trees, and more often than not came to the right sentence. So those folks, Judge Perry during Casey Anthony, I thought did a phenomenal job, not just with the media, but with all the attention. I thought he kept us all on track. He kept us on time. He made sure we were prepared when we had to be. So all those judges, I tried to emulate and I tried to learn from.
Do you have any mentors or role models among judges?
I absolutely do. I'm going to start with the former chief judge of the Florida 3rd District Court of Appeal. He's a man that I clerked for out of law school for 2 years. He was previously the public defender down in Dade County, and for 2 years I worked with him. I learned from him. I learned his judicial thought process. I learned how he analyzed cases, and he has always been one of my strongest mentors.
And his name is?
Philip Hubbard, Hubbart.
Mr. George, can you address this question? What in your background has prepared you to deal with questions of legal rights for women and minorities?
I spent 6 years prosecuting sex crimes and child abuse cases, and I don't know if this is really going to dovetail, but I'll try. The victims' rights statutes are very clear about what can and cannot be talked about or mentioned during the course of the trial. Certainly, victims' rights, as well as women's rights, as well as elderly rights, as well as maybe gay rights, all of these, if the law allows it and the law protects, then that's what our job is to do. As a state attorney, I don't have a client, per se. The people are my client. When we bring a case, it's the state of Florida versus whatever the particular defendant is. And we may have a listed victim, but I am not their advocate. But I am there to protect them the best way that I can during the course of the proceeding. When I was doing sexual battery trials and handling those cases, it was incumbent upon me to protect my victims, whether they be children or women or boys, as far as the statute and the laws allow. You can only do what the law allows, whether that be closing courtrooms, preventing questions from being asked, preventing testimony from being elicited. I've tried to champion my victims as much as I could and protect them the best way that I can.
Follow up with that, Judge?
Sure.
I guess the same question to you, Judge.
Go ahead and restate that for me.
Yes. What in your background has prepared you to deal competently with women's rights and minorities' rights in the courtroom?
I have, I've taken a number of judicial courses that address the substantive law of women's rights and minority rights. Remember, the role of a judge is to follow the law, so our first task is to make sure we understand what the law is. So we approach every case from that perspective, making sure we understand what the law is, and then making sure we follow and apply that law. From a more humanistic standpoint, having worked with a number of the organizations and individuals that I have in the past gives me an understanding of some of their situations and environments. I was trying to recall, but I believe that while I was a shareholder at the Lowndes Drosdick firm, I actually handled employment discrimination cases. It was not based on minority, and I'm trying to recall what it was based on, but I have had some experience in that. I've also, as an employer, dealt with having to learn as an employer what my employer obligations are under those acts. I've written an employee manual. I've handled employee disputes, and as a certified circuit civil mediator, I have mediated a couple of those disputes.
Thank you. Mr. George, outside the courtroom, what experiences would you say would help inform your ability to perform as a judge?
Can you be more specific?
Sure. Have you had experiences working with organizations, as Judge Schreiber has talked about, that would help inform your...
But certainly not as much. My job is a little bit different and certainly takes up an awful lot of time. I did participate and work with Special Olympics when I was in college and when I first got out of law school. Certainly a member, obviously, of the Orange County Bar, the Florida Bar. I've attended the meetings and lunches and workshops. I've attended charity events that the bar holds. I've volunteered at my church. But for the most part, my social work has been doing the work of the people. Sure.
Judge, how many hours would you say that you dedicate to the job each week?
Gosh, it's hard to put it in hours. I'm there typically by 7:45. I typically stay until 6. Now that I'm on the civil bench, I take the notebooks home the night before to make sure I'm prepared for the trials the next day. I owe that obligation to the attorneys that come into the courtroom or the hearing room to be prepared and to understand what they're doing. And there are those Saturdays where you have to work to write orders. This past weekend, I was the emergency duty judge, which means I was at the Juvenile Justice Center and the Orange County Jail from 7:30 until 3 on Saturday and Sunday doing initial appearances. And that's all part of the job, and that's all part of the job that I understand and appreciate and respect.
I think we're just about hitting, we may have time for one more question.
Do you think that the court system in Florida, and this harkens back to your experience with women and minorities, is good at ensuring equal justice based upon income level, socioeconomic levels?
I don't know that it's changed all that much. I know that when I was a public defender, the resources available to me to defend my clients was certainly not the same as what somebody who could afford private counsel could afford in terms of investigations, testings, things of that nature. So I think that inequality probably still exists. I was still an assistant public defender when the O.J. Simpson trial was going on, and I remember going out to the jail and seeing my clients, and everybody wanted the O.J. defense. They wanted me to do this, and they wanted me to do that, and they wanted me to get all these people. And I would try to explain to them that, you know, we don't have a budget for that. It would be great. I still think you probably see that. Do you get the justice you can afford? I don't necessarily believe that either. I think at the end of the day, between the judges and eventually the juries have to figure out what's going on. And make the right decision. It starts with the judges to make sure that they get all the the relevant information in front of a jury. Is there inequality? There probably is, to some extent. Is it destroying or warping the system? I don't believe it is. There's always the ability to try to fix the race, so to speak, and sometimes money talks. If you can afford the best testers and if you can afford the best experts, sometimes you'll have an edge. But I don't know if that has anything to do with the judges. The judges are still going to make their decisions based on relevant evidence and whether or not it has probative value and whether or not that probative value outweighs any prejudicial effect. And so long as those cores are maintained and the best evidence gets in front of juries or to judges if it's a bench trial, then hopefully the last stop will be the judges that can make sure that that inequality doesn't happen.
In the civil context, probably, because folks in the civil arena are typically there because they voluntarily submit themselves to the jurisdiction of the court. I'm talking about the plaintiffs that file the lawsuits. So oftentimes there may be different outcomes based upon how much those individuals can afford to pay their attorneys. In the criminal arena, I have seen some absolutely outstanding public servant judges, public servant attorneys, meaning public defenders and state attorneys. And I've seen some terrible criminal defense attorneys. So I think it just goes to the nature of this profession, just like any other profession. There are good attorneys, there are bad attorneys. You can pay a lot of money for a bad attorney, you can pay a lot of money for a good attorney, but I think on the whole, I have been incredibly impressed with the public defender's office and the people out of that office and the commitment that they show their job, remembering that many of them are very young and are very inexperienced. So this is probably their first job, and it's incumbent upon the judge to help guide them, help mentor them, help teach them what professionalism is, and help make sure they understand their duty to the system or the process, and not their pure obligation to win, how it differs.
Mm-hmm.